and welcome back to the Living Room Bite-Size for Kids. I have Oscar here with me this afternoon, a very willing volunteer. Oscar, I'm going to take this glass of water. I'm going to place a piece of cardboard on top of it and tip it upside down over your head, and you're not going to get wet. Do you trust me?
A little bit.
Not really, because those of you who come along to Sunday school at the Living Room know that we tried this before and it failed miserably and Oscar got absolutely soaked. But I'm here to set that record straight and prove myself trustworthy. Let's give it a go. You ready? Here we go. Ta-da!
Oh,
I have redeemed myself. Thank you very much, Oscar.
thank you.
I proved myself trustworthy, and that is a huge relief. In our Bible story, God's people have come. They've found freedom at last. After 400 years of slavery, lots of warnings that the Pharaoh didn't heed, and terrible times for Egypt, they are finally free and they can leave. That must have felt so amazing. That burden of slavery, that awful punishment and hard work conditions and difficulties over 400 years, and finally they are free. If you're a Christian this afternoon, maybe you know a sense of freedom. What do I mean by that? Well, when we realize that we have done things that separate us from God, it can make us feel a burden, maybe a weight on our shoulders, or maybe we even feel fearful and afraid because we don't like the thought of being separated from God. And it can get to the point where we realize that we need to come to Jesus and ask him to forgive us because he died on the cross to take the punishment for those sins that separate us from God. And in that moment, we feel an amazing burden lifted. We feel a freedom that we hadn't experienced before. And I've experienced this just when I was 6 years old. That's when I made that decision. And I can still remember, even though I'm a lot older than that now, I can still remember that feeling of fear and sadness. And when I asked Jesus to forgive me for the things that I had done that separated me from God, wow, I still remember the relief and the joy and the freedom. God's people were free. And God does an amazing thing. He sends them some symbols of his presence. He sends during the day a pillar of cloud to guide them, and during the night a pillar of fire. Morning, noon, night, the Israelites, God's people, can see God is with us. He is leading us, and he has made us free, and he will help us. They come to the edge of a sea, the Red Sea. And word comes that Pharaoh has changed his mind and he wants the Israelites back. And so he sends out 600 chariots to go and chase down the Israelites to bring them back to continue to be slaves in Egypt. What's going to happen now? The people see the Egyptians coming, and they cry out to God for help. But God is with his people. And God tells Moses, don't be worried. Put your stick over the sea and I will part the waters. And you'll be able to walk through the sea. How amazing. Well, Moses puts his stick over the sea. It says that there were walls of water on either side, and all God's people had to do was walk through. They had to trust God that he was with them and he would protect them and he would bring them through to the other side. I wonder, can you imagine being there? Imagine the smell of the sea, the wind blowing, the chariots and the noise of the Egyptian chariots coming. And all you have to do is walk through the walls of sea on either side. What would you do? Well, you know the story, but they didn't know the story. I wonder, would you be at the front of the queue? Yes, get me through. I trust God. Or maybe you would stand a little bit further back and say, I'm not so sure. I'd like to see what happens to other people first. Or perhaps you would even decide not to go through. No, I'm not going through. I'm too scared. What happens if the sea comes back down? What happens if I'm not protected? The Israelites chose to trust God and to walk through the sea. Do you trust God? When God says that he works all things together for good for the people who love him, do you trust him? We're living in a time when we could be tempted to fear and to worry, and yet God says that he can work all things together for good. God says that if we love him and we follow him, then he's with us at all times. And that brings us peace, and that brings us joy and hope. Do you trust him? Even when you can't do things that you wish you could, do you trust him that he has a plan and a purpose and that it's good for your life? I hope that you would be at the front of the queue saying, I trust God. Let's see what adventure awaits. I don't know what's coming up. I don't know what lies ahead, but I'm going to do what God wants me to do today. Because when I do what he wants, life is an amazing adventure. God's people had to make a choice. They either had to go through or they didn't. They couldn't stand in the middle. That wasn't a place to be. Let's go all through this week. Let's be reading his word, the Bible, and let's do what it says. Let's trust God, because that's an amazing journey. Let's be all in. Have a great week, and we'll see you again soon.